Kiev. This is John. It's going to be my third time in iForum. Thanks, Dennis, and all the organizers. It's great to be with you here again. I'm going to speak about some first-hand experience. While mentoring startups and running accelerator programs, I had the opportunity to work with hundreds of startups so far. And I want to talk about, the difference between the validation and the follow-on process while you try to find the product market fit and getting really geared for growth. And this is pretty much happens in the pre-Series A round. You see, validation is good enough for a startup to get seed rounds. If you're looking for a seed funding, it is good enough to have a validated idea. That means that you identified a real problem, you have some signs of traction, and you're kind of growing, hopefully, and people are using your product because it's solving their problem. But that doesn't mean that you managed to find the right solution. That doesn't mean that you managed to create the right product for the customer. And this is the phase of product market fit, when you find kind of what customer really wants, and when you manage to bundle a solution that really satisfies their needs, much better than alternative solutions, much better than competition. That means you found the product market fit. So I want to start with a recent tweet of founder of Box, Aaron Levy, and he cited some examples in his recent tweet that with some of the markets that investors, people thought that already satisfied, that were already full about valid solutions, newcomers came around and changed the market, disrupt the market. And this is pretty much the case. It was pretty much the case with Facebook as well. When Facebook first came out, people thought that the game in social media was over because we were using a lot of social sites like Bebo, High Five, or local ones like VKontakte, or Orkut was very popular in Latin America, for instance. But Mark Zuckerberg came out with a very novel insight. He kind of saw what other social sites didn't see. The other social sites' primary purpose, primary hypothesis, was about the fact that people will use our sites to meet with new people. Because they thought people already in touch with their friends and so on, so why would they want to be in touch with them in social media? While Mark Zuckerberg totally twisted that notion. He created a social site that was only designed to be in touch with the people that you already know. And Peter Thiel saw that in his book, 0 to 1, I suggest that. It's very, very useful reading. It gives real great insights of how to become really successful startups. He believes that the startup really grasps what's valuable in the mind of the customer. And also he identifies, or she identifies, what competition or alternative methods really missing, what they really fail to deliver, what they don't see. What they don't see, but it's obvious, it's in the market. And what the team can do about that. Of course, this is not as easy as it looks here. It's kind of a journey that you start with an MVP, you build your product, then you gather insights and apply them to your product and make it better, turn it into what people really want. Another example of latecomers is Google. Before Google, there used to be a lot of portals, a lot of search sites. I wouldn't say search engines, but at least there were players like Yahoo or Alta Vista who were trying to provide search. But the founders actually tried to solve their own problem. They were doing PhD at Stanford University back then, and they couldn't find the research articles that will help them for their PhD thesis. So they wrote down a crawler that will search for them and kind of check the content and prioritize according to the quality based on some metrics. They created an algorithm for that. And I'm one of their first customers because a year after Google was founded, I was doing my master's degree, and I was in the library trying to find some materials. A friend of mine approached me and told me about Google. And he told me that you don't need to waste time in the library, just go to Google and search the material. It will just give you very easily. So this is what we call, narrow and deep vertical. If instead of starting with broad and shallow markets, you should pick a slice of the market that really needs your product badly. And, PhD students or master's students or university students back then really needed that so much. And Google owned that initial vertical in a very fast period of time, in a very quick period of time. But then, you're not confined to that. You can move on to different personas. Nowadays, everybody uses Google. Or you can move on to different features or new offerings, and you can grow based on that deep and narrow vertical. Another good example is Amazon. They started selling books, and over time, now they sell everything. Not just products, but cloud services and so on. So getting back to this lean cycle, you build something, you give it to the customer, then you measure the customer's reaction, and then you apply that knowledge to the product. Building stuff and measuring is kind of straightforward. What's really difficult is to gain insights, to collect insights from these data, from these learning, and apply that to the product. This side requires some sort of empathy. You should be able to put yourself in the shoes of your customer. You should really feel how they feel and how they look. And you have to be really, really good observers. So how to sort of collect these insights in a best way and apply them to product? I'm going to suggest 5 approaches that I built over time with my work at accelerators and startups. Well, first of them is to internalize the problem. It's always much better to solve your own problem or somebody's problem that is very close to you. But if that is not the case, it's totally perfect. It's totally okay to solve some other person's problem. It's okay. But in that case, you have to make it your problem. You have to put yourself in the shoes of your customer. As an example for that, I'm going to cite HomeJoy. It used to be a Y Combinator company, and it was offering on-demand house cleaning services. Your house is really messy, and you just click on the call button on your mobile phone, and HomeJoy comes on with, reliable cleaners, and they sort it out. The founder was a PhD student who, ceased her studies. But the really most interesting thing what she did, she actually worked as a cleaner for 3 months. So she went to the houses, cleaned the house, just like not like a PhD student in a really top college, but like a house cleaner. Only this way you can really understand the market. You can really understand the supplier or the customer. So it is very important to internalize the problem, make it your problem. And the second one is, it's always better to listen to customer stories. I mean, some of the startups that I train in the accelerator programs that I work with, they start with surveys. Starting with surveys is not a very good idea. Surveys are good in the, let's say, midterm, but not at the beginning. Because by their nature, surveys are kind of biased. You write down the questions based on your hypothesis, but they might not exist in the market, or the reality in the market can be totally different than what you're addressing on the survey. So it's always better to make one-to-one friendly talks with customers, unbiased interviews. And it is very essential not to tell anything about the solution that you have in mind. It's more like identifying a problem, and while talking one-to-one with the customer, just scratching what's beneath the problem. So let them speak without showing them a solution. You're going to show the solution in the form of a product later on, but never in the interviews. So then what I suggest, this is like a method that I use in accelerators. It's been inspired by design thinking methodologies. Once you go to the market and identify what people really behave when they come across to this problem that you're trying to solve, or what are their desires or wishes when they face with that problem, you have to put down each learning into a post-it. And let's say you made 30 interviews to test your hypothesis initially. Then you have to look into patterns or outliers. Let's say out of 30 interviews, 20 people said that they do A, and 2 of them said they do B. That means there is a pattern in doing A. So you have to build your product or revisit your assumption about the business hypothesis in that way. And this is kind of well known. You have to apply a lot of tests, just like in the age of enlightenment. Like a social scientist, you have to go through vigorous tests. Peter Drucker calls the entrepreneur as the business experimentalist. So there is a never-ending test period. You do A and B tests, and you do tools like that will help you a lot in terms of what people really want. You measure the conversions and so on. Once you applied your learnings from the one-to-one interviews, and once you identified the clusters of what people really want. But then giving it to the customer, giving your MVP to the customer and letting them play with it, it's very important to go through post-product trial interviews. Now, they are different than previous interviews. Now, in this case, you can easily ask about the product, easily ask about how they felt about it, what was their experience about your product, and so on. It is also very important to identify who exactly is your customer, who is the persona. Sometimes we start with an assumption and then end up that we identify that actually some other group of people need our product more. Then we can revisit that. Or we have some cases that the user of a product is somebody, but the person who's making the purchasing decision is someone else. If you're buying a product, for instance, for your kids, then the parents can change or influence the purchasing decision, and vice versa, actually. And it's also very important to identify and listen to why they need that solution. Again, it's better to look into real-life stories, that a certain problem that happens to that certain persona and you hear about it. It's always a good signal to identify if that story really flows, if they tell like a lot of things about that problem and experience and how they behave when it happens to them, that means there is a strong market potential for your product. And it's also important to check, once that problem happens, what alternatives they tried. It's not supposed to be competition. It can be like alternative methods, conventional methods, like calling someone or so on. And finally, it's really good to give them a magic wand. On the interview, tell them that you have a magic wand and you touch my product. What would you do about it? How would you change about it? Most of the cases, you don't get much interesting insights, but if you do several interviews, 1 or 2 of them will really give you a lot of eye-opening insights. So, the whole idea is about finding the product market fit. In my personal experience, these things help while you're searching for the product market fit. And what's important that when you're going to identify when you reach the product market fit, it's actually based on the metrics. The first rule is like you have to grow at least 5% week on week on the metric that really matters to you. It can change for different product types, but let's say it's a mobile application, it's the weekly active users in a sense. If you're growing more than 5% week on week, then that's a good signal. If you can reach 7% plus, that means you reach and you found kind of, or actually you're very close to the product market fit. And if your monthly churn is less than 5%, and the cost that you spend while gathering customers at least 3 times higher than the lifetime value of the customer, that means you're pretty much very close to product market fit and ready to grow. And this is very much like after seed stage, I would say something like pre-Series A stage that you have to follow on. Okay, thanks a lot. Thank you.